Hold on.
Wait, no, you start recording.
Action. Action. We'll get the whole thing.
Okay, so let's talk about putting motherboards together now. And we're doing this to simulate as if we had bought all these components that we've got on our desk right now and we're building a brand new PC. Okay? So, put it down. Okay, so if we had just bought this, we would have taken it out of a big anti-static bag. And if we took it out of the anti-static bag, usually what I'll do is I'll put, usually there's a piece of foam in there, I'll put that on the bottom of my table, I'll put the anti-static bag on top of that, and I'll set this on top of my anti-static bag. Before I build a motherboard into a PC, I prep the motherboard as much as I can. I will put my memory in my motherboard, my CPU, and my CPU cooling fan on my motherboard prior to putting it inside my case. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to prep our motherboard. Now, in this case, we're going to up the RAM on all these to a gig of RAM, and or 2 gig of RAM, so we've got 4 or 512 sticks. I'm going to make sure they're all out. I'm going to line them up real good, and I'm going to get all 4 of these put into my motherboard. And I just think it's easier to put these in before I get the CPU and the CPU fan in, because then they're completely out of the way. The fan is out of the way. So I've got those in. Again, I'm being careful not to touch any of my capacitors. If I'm touching my motherboard, I'm doing it from the side, or I'm doing it from the heatsink that's on my Northbridge in this case. Because this is an older motherboard, the only heatsink on the motherboard is on the Northbridge, and there is no heatsink on the Southbridge. Now again, I've got a PGA socket here. PGA is for
a 10 grid array.
10 grid array, so it's got holes in it. I've got a ZIF socket with a lever arm here. I'm going to take my newly cleaned CPU, which if I look at it is a 2.4 gigahertz Pentium 4, and it doesn't give any other intel on the thing other than it's made by Intel.
I see what
so
you did there.
I got my little triangle right there. I'm going to match it with the triangle on here. You see the triangle that I'm talking about right there?
Triangle.
Okay, and if I have them all lined up and I haven't bent my pins, I should be able to set it right on there and it drops right in. Then I'm going to hold it down with some pressure. I'm going to take and latch that on. So now my CPU is ready to go. Now in this case, I've got a completely clean heatsink and I've got a completely clean CPU. So I'm going to use thermal grease on there. This is thermal grease. Okay, I'm going to shake it up, and it basically is like model glue. Now the person who put the other one on obviously went a little thermal grease happy. Okay, you don't have to put on that much, but you should. And this bottle is really low. I'm going to have to look for another bottle. But you have to at least cover the whole CPU. I'm going to see if I got enough just to pour some of it out.
That's a bad idea.
Let's see, I just did the server, so I'm running a little low. I may have to look for my other bottle here before I do this. Some CPUs or CPU fans, instead of using thermal grease, they have a big square piece of thermal tape, like the one that you guys have over there. And the difference there is that that doesn't need to have thermal grease put on it. The tape just goes down and fills in those microscopic holes, and the motherboard just fine. Now, why are we doing this? Why are we putting this on in the first place?
For safety.
Make sure it doesn't overheat.
For the children.
Right, we're trying to make the CPU fan or the CPU cooling fan and heatsink as effective as possible. So we're trying to get as good a connection as we can between the two. So after I've got that on there, and I actually would normally put it a little more liberally than that, I'm going to go ahead and line this up because it's easier to plug it in out of the way. This one only, by the way, has 3 pins on it. Newer ones have 4 pins because they sense the heat of the CPU, and that motherboard can speed up and slow down the fan. This is a single speed fan, it's just going to go. But newer models will speed up and slow down the CPU fan. So after I've got it on there, I'm going to slide it down right through the middle of that case housing there, and then I'm going to pop these over those same brackets that I undid it from. And after I've got them all on, I'm just going to take the lever arms and this is going to squeeze that down on top of there. So now my motherboard is ready to go into my case, and for now on, once I've got it on there, I always just grab it by the CPU cooling fan. So after you get that together, we're basically reversing the process as if we had just bought a brand new case. So when we get a brand new case, we're going to take it, we're going to make sure we match up before we put it together, that we're putting on this correctly, okay? So I know that it goes in that way, and I'm going to go and push this in, and when we put this in, you really need to make sure it snaps in all the way around, because the worst thing is to have to mess with this afterwards. And a lot of times, they have little tabs like this on them. You want to really make sure that you don't push that tab down, because if I get this all screwed in and then all of a sudden see a tab's covering up, for instance, in this case it would be my internet connection, my RJ45 connection. If I had to push this down, I have to take the whole motherboard out in order to do that. So as I put this back in, I'm going to get all my cables out of the way, and I'm looking at my motherboard connections here, and I can see these are called, do you know what remember what these are called right here? That hold it off of the metal part here?
These are your screw
Motherboard
connectors.
connectors.
Risers.
Risers.
Okay.
Motherboard
They
riser
keep your
connectors.
motherboard from, because obviously if we had our motherboard just laying on this piece of metal, it would short out, right? So the risers hold the motherboard away from the case itself, and that's where I'm going to screw in all these connections right here onto these risers. So I'm going to take, and I'm going to put it in, I'm going to slide it through the back, and then I'm going to look down here, I'm going to line up all my screw holes, and I'm going to screw my motherboard into my case next.